encourage your soul, enlighten your mind, and empower your faith. This is the Light Network. We're inviting the life of Jesus into our lives. Welcome to Today with Jesus. My name is Robert Hatfield.
And my name is Dan Winkler, and we're so glad that you've joined us in our study today. We're in Mark chapter 7. We're walking through paragraph by paragraph this wonderful gospel, the Gospel of Mark. And we're in chapter 7, verses 24 through chapter 8, verse 38. And it's in this section where we focus on this idea of, man, I am tired, but I can't be tired of it. Let me ask you this. Have you ever asked the question, how do you get, or have you ever been asked the question, how do you get it all done? Or have you ever said to yourself, how about this, Robert? If I don't do it, it what?
It won't get done.
It won't get done. Or how about this question? Where am I going to find the time? Or I am tired all the time. All of those questions and statements revolve around this idea of, man, I am just tired, but I can't afford to be tired of it all and just want to throw in the towel and walk away. There is a word for this that we have used for quite some time now. It's called burnout. And I think that today in Mark 7, verses 24 through chapter 8, verse 38, I think we're going to only go through about verse 10 of chapter 8 today. We see Jesus beginning to struggle with some of this stuff of brownout or burnout. Not that he burned out, but we see him having to face things that can lead to burnout. And boy, we can learn some great lessons about Jesus and from Jesus from this particular study. How about, this is a very lengthy passage. Robert, why don't you just kind of outline where we're going to be today? There are about 3 different encounters that Jesus has with folks in our reading today, and kind of put our finger on the pulse of this for us and kind of introduce our thoughts of where we are with Jesus on this occasion.
Well, I'm glad you said that, because you said this is a very lengthy passage, and then you said, Robert, what? I was nervous you were going to, why don't you read it for us? So thank you for saying outline instead.
Okay.
3 main sections as we cover Mark 7:24 through chapter 8, verse 10. The first one is in Mark 7:24 through 30, and that is a Syrophoenician woman who comes to Jesus and really comes on behalf of her daughter, who is possessed by a demon. And so we kind of have 3 individuals that are part of that conversation. Of course, Jesus, and then the Syrophoenician woman, and the demon-possessed daughter, who will, of course, be healed. And then in the second place, the second section is Mark 7:31 to 37, where Jesus heals a man who is deaf, and I believe also mute. At least he has a speech impediment. His tongue is loosed, his ears are opened, and Jesus has a very dramatic way of really emphasizing the miraculous healing that he's going to do in that section. And then third, Jesus feeds another hungry multitude, this time feeding the 4,000 in Mark chapter 8, verses 1 through 10. Very reminiscent of feeding the 5,000 back in chapter 6 that we covered in season 1 of the podcast, but with a few slight differences in terms of the number of the amount of food that was available to him. Very meager. The miracle is definitely still there. And even the number of baskets full that were gathered after the fact. So 3 sections there, each of them emphasizing a miracle of Jesus. And as we'll see, in some very different locations as well as we go through the text today.
So what we actually have individuals from various walks of life coming to Jesus. I believe the Syrophoenician is actually called a Gentile, even.
Mm-hmm.
And you have Jesus giving attention to her, another individual, and then this mass crowd of 4,000 plus. And so Jesus is encountering people from different walks of life and multitudes of people. And I like to think of it this way, Robert, as a preacher. Uh, when I was in local work for almost 50 years, I felt as though there were times when everyone was just kind of plugging into me and needing something. And that's very true. Actually, you are a minister
Mm-hmm.
ministering to folks. And so people are plugging into you all the time. And there were times I felt like, man, people are plugging into me all the time. Who do I plug into? How do I get energized and stay focused? And it can be a struggle, a true struggle for just anyone. I think it's important for us to step into Jesus' life and know that he didn't burn out, but he was facing a lot of things that today can cause us to be burned out.
Mm.
Let me introduce our thoughts on this burnout. And by the way, our section is so lengthy. I believe we have decided to actually study this section in two different episodes. And so let me just kind of introduce what we're talking about with burnout by reading a section from a book by a man named Myron Rush. Myron D. Rush. He wrote a book entitled Burnout. I read it decades ago and it was so very helpful. Myron Rush was an author, a consultant for management training, and I read this book all the way back in 1991, and it proved to be very helpful to me. But he kind of gives insight into what burnout really is or what it can do to us. Let me read it to us. My original excitement, and he's talking about how he experienced burnout. My original excitement, enthusiasm, and high energy level slowly turned into fatigue. My confidence in myself was gone. My goals had vanished. The love and concern I once had for people had turned into dislike and resentment. Ouch. When you burn both ends of the candle, he said, it may produce twice as much light, but the candle burns out twice as fast.
Mm.
And that is good analogy for the burnout process. He goes on, people experiencing burnout suddenly discover, and it just happens, they suddenly discover that all of their mental, emotional, and physical energies have been consumed. They have exhausted their strength and lost their will to persevere.
Mm.
Burnout is not a respecter of persons, he said. It occurs in people of all walks of life: doctors, teachers, bus drivers, counselors, pastors or preachers, homemakers, students. In order for our lives to run smoothly, they must be in balance. And he says burnout is the result of life getting too far out of balance. When we step into the context of Mark 7, verses 24 and following, we find Jesus um, he's in a circumstance where he could get his life out of balance in a heartbeat hurry.
Mm.
But when we watch him, we can see what was causing some of this and then what we can do from his example to avoid some of this. I think from the context, we see two basic causes of burnout. And here they are: popularity, people, and hostility, again, people. In essence, people cause us to burn out
Mm.
because of our multiple interactions with people on either a positive or negative basis. Also, in this context, we see two things that we can do to avoid burnout as we study the life of Jesus. And those two things are privacy and priorities.
Mm.
Now, I think we have decided that today, as we focus on these three interactions recorded in Mark 7:24 to chapter 8, verse 10, we're going to look at the first cause, popularity, and the first solution that we can engage to avoid burnout, watching Jesus, privacy.
Mm.
The popularity of Jesus and the need for privacy on the part of Jesus can teach us some things about this idea of burnout. Now, before we do that, I'm going to ask you to do something. I've been retired now for a few years, and so expectations are not as demanding for my life. And I serve Jesus still, but at pace rather than based on what others need as much as in times past. You're still right there in the thick of it. And at your age, you find yourself not only as a minister of a wonderful congregation of God's people, but you are the husband of a wonderful wife and you have small children. The demands on your life are multitude. So I want you to talk to me from your vantage point and tell me kind of what you see in your peers or others that you've noticed have burned out, or challenges that you might face that could cause you to burn out. Kind of talk to me from your vantage point of life about this idea of burnout and what it can do to us.
Well, first of all, I really appreciate you kind of rubbing it in about how you're at pace and I'm still right in the thick of it. I really appreciate that a lot.
I love it. Let me kick back. Let me kick back and let you just talk here for a while. I'm gonna
That's fine. Yeah, go change into your Hawaiian shirt, and I'll be here when you get back.
My Hawaiian what?
Your Hawaiian shirt, you know, the little button-up deal. I didn't say skirt. Wow.
That also comes with retirement if the ears leave you.
That is what we call unscripted, everyone. I just wanted you to know.
Oh me.
So I was thinking about burnout, and it's one of those things, especially maybe in corporate America, and with the mindset that Americans generally tend to have, that we sort of denigrate. You know, it's like, oh well, only the people who can't hack it are the people who end up burning out. You know, maybe you just need to get your wits about you and keep going, or whatever. You know, if you can't take it, then get out of the game, kind of thing. And the reality is, as we're going to point out in the life of Jesus here, I mean, Jesus is trying to get away for a little while. As you said, maybe that he's not burned out. He's not going to give up. We know that. But it does weigh on you a little bit. And I think in our circumstances, we can sort of see the same thing. Mm-hmm. As I was thinking through this a little bit in preparation and sort of distilled down into three things or reactions, things that burnout can cause me to be or to do. In the first place, it seems like burnout can cause me to get caught up in busyness. And I think we might struggle with that in modern America anyway. I tend to kind of wear my workload like a badge of honor. And so if I feel the weight of that, whatever it might be, and ministers I think can fall into this too, speaking from my experience, that, well, you know, I want to conduct myself with pride. I don't want to have to admit to the congregation or to the eldership or whoever, the leaders, that maybe I'm struggling under the weight of things right now because of the pressure of everything. And so I sort of get caught so much up in that, and to try and counter it a little bit, I just focus on being busy. And so I'm spinning a lot of wheels, but I'm really not getting anything done. And I become too busy for other people. Here Jesus is trying to retreat, as we'll see in the text, and just to get away for a while. But when the people keep coming from all over the place, he still gives them the time of day. In fact, much more than that. And so that's something for us to think about. In the second place, it seems like busyness could cause me to be stuck up. Similar to what I just said, I'm too self-absorbed to relate to other people. I don't want to, because I feel like sort of tired of everything. I don't want to be feeling what they're feeling. I feel like I've got enough going on my own plate. I don't have time to add your problems to the problems that I'm feeling. And so
Right.
burnout causes me to feel as though I can't do that. I can't suffer under the weight of somebody else. And then it could cause me to be fed up. Uh, I allow bitterness into my heart, and I prevent other people from being able to rely on me for help and for support. And just imagine if Jesus had been that way. Here's this woman that's going to come to Jesus with her demon possessed daughter. The daughter's back at home, but on her heart is this daughter, the Syrophoenician woman's daughter. And Jesus doesn't brush her off. Jesus doesn't ignore her. Uh, Jesus, I believe, will test her faith a little bit, but at the end of it, Jesus is there for her. The multitudes are there. They've been with him 3 days. Jesus said, if I send them home, they're going to faint. I know I'm getting a little ahead of ourselves, but maybe that's all right. But at the end of it, people could rely on Jesus to be there for them. And when I'm burned out, I become less reliable in those ways. I'm I'm not, by trying to plow through it, I'm not helping myself or others. I'm hindering the work that Jesus would have me to do. And I
Right.
just say all this to raise just how important it is for us to treat burnout as a real thing, first of all, and then to realize the terrible consequences of not dealing with it like we should.
Well, it causes you to disconnect out of self-preservation.
Yeah.
When you're burned out, my experience with those that have burned out, and I know even in my ministry, I never burned out, but there were times I felt like I was reaching that plane where, which was right next to it, called brownout, and I would have to step back and re-energize and do some things that would keep me from stepping over the edge and being burned out. But those that are burned out disconnect because their emotions are frayed,
Hmm.
and they find themselves not even being able to help others because they don't want anything to do with others just out of self preservation. This is a really, really serious thing. It can take an individual that has so much to do for Jesus in the lives of others and destroy them. We actually become self destructive when it comes to this concept of burnout, don't we?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And the point is, as we're people may be thinking, all right, where are we headed with this? But as we approach the end of Mark 7, the middle to the end, and then going into Mark chapter 8 between this episode and the next one, the Lord willing, what we're going to see is that Jesus is proactive in trying to counter this.
Yes.
But in the midst of that, of course, life continues and ministry must continue, and that's the way that would be our experience as well, right? When I'm feeling like this and my emotions are frayed, I don't feel like I can deal with anything else, but more things keep coming.
Yeah.
And so I think there's a lot that we can learn as we sort of observe the
You have
life of
to stay in.
Jesus.
You have to stay engaged,
Yeah.
don't you?
Yeah, that's right.
Even though you feel this way, you have to stay engaged. So
Right.
let's step into the life of Jesus and ask our two questions here. All of that introductory material, trying to help us to see that what we're going to find with Jesus on this occasion is extremely relevant to our lives and very can perhaps provide us some things that are very practical in solution. Let's ask the question, what can we learn about Jesus? What can we learn from Jesus when it comes to this idea of being tired, but not tired of it? Um, Again, there are two basic things that cause burnout from this context. One is popularity, and the other is hostility, both coming from interacting with people. Let's focus on popularity here for the next few minutes and see that this is a time in Jesus' life when he was exceedingly popular with people and they were coming to him from everywhere. I see in this passage, Robert, as we read, frequent references to geography. Let's start here with chapter 7, verse 24. And it says, and from there he arose and went away to the region of Tyre and Sidon. Now let's pause for a moment. You'll read right over that if you're not careful. It says he arose and went away. Went away from where? If you go back in chapter 7 all the way to to chapter 6, actually, to verse 53, you'll find where he is. He's in a place called Gennesaret, and that's northwest of the Sea of Galilee, very, very close to the city of Capernaum, which the Gospels call his city, Jesus' city. It was his headquarters. So he was in Gennesaret, right there close to the place where he would headquarter or spend so much time in his ministry. And he just went away. He went away from there and he went to the region of Tyre and Sidon. Tyre and Sidon would be west of Capernaum, and it would be over there close to the Mediterranean Sea. So he not only got away, he he wanted to get way far away. And and yet what happened? He's here in Tyre and Sidon, and someone comes to him for help. We drop down in our context for the day, and we find another geographic reference in verse 34. It tells us he returned from the region of Tyre and Sidon and went through Sidon to the Sea of Galilee. So he's gone now. He left the northwest portion of the Sea of Galilee, Gennesaret, went over to Tyre and Sidon, and then he left there and he went back to the Sea of Galilee. So he's going back to the same location, but it says he entered the region of the Decapolis. This was a section where there were 10 major cities, and therefore the word Decapolis. And it would have been southeast of the city of Galilee. And it's there that once again, he didn't find peace and privacy, but individuals brought to him this man who was deaf with also a speech impediment. And then you come down to chapter 8. And in chapter 8, verse 1, it says, in those days, when again a great crowd had gathered, they had nothing to eat. And if you do a little deep dive, it suggested that they are gathered together on the northeast shore of Galilee. So it would be north of the Decapolis. And so but here he is. He's left the Decapolis where he healed this man with a hearing and speech impediment. And now he goes north, and a lot of people, 4,000 plus, are following him. And he's still surrounded by people. People are everywhere. And then you come down to verse 22, which is outside of our context for the day, but it's still a geographic reference. Verse 22 of chapter 8 says they came to Bethsaida, and that would be north of Galilee. And in Bethsaida, another individual with a disability, this man was struggling with blindness. They brought this man with blindness to Jesus. And so here's the point. Popularity can cause burnout. And when you study Matthew 7:24 and following, you find that Jesus is trying to get away, but everywhere he goes, people are following him. He can't get away from people. So if we're not really careful, we'll look right over these words in chapter 7:24. It says he could not be hidden. That tells me he was trying to hide, but he couldn't be hidden. And people were coming to him all of the time from everywhere. He was a very popular person on this occasion. So Jesus was a man of popularity. And I sense as we read through this that Jesus got tired, very, very tired from helping people. Now, I think I want to emphasize this. Listen to the wording carefully. Jesus got tired from helping people. And you see this as the context unfolds. Let me pause for a moment and you step in here and help us out some.
Well, it's hard for us to fully appreciate the geography of all of this, and maybe even the amount of time that it must have taken to, travel these routes on foot. and you're going from, the general vicinity of the Sea of Galilee, surrounding it, maybe beginning up on the northwestern side, then you go all the way to Phoenicia, in Tyre and Sidon, and then bordering the Mediterranean, as you mentioned, coming all the way back. So somebody I read mentioned that this is a really strange route to take. And they said that it's similar to going from New York City to Chicago via Boston. It's just you're going out of your way, and maybe there's something to that again. He could not be hidden, which implies maybe that was sort of the purpose, the point. But to your point, either the people are following him from one destination or the other, or when he gets into town, it's made known that he's there. And so Jesus can't escape the crowds. These aren't the first times that he's visited these places. And if you've been with us for previous episodes in the first season, we've talked about the Decapolis before, and some of these other sites as well. So word of mouth has spread, but also previous activity, encounters of Jesus in these locations as well, have brought a lot of attention to his preaching and ministry. And so he can't escape. But the travel patterns seem to lend more evidence to this idea that he is trying to get a little rest, to get away from people for a little while.
Yeah, that's an excellent observation. I love that. Now, what was it from
from New York City to Chicago via Boston?
I've taken some air flights like that, haven't you?
That's exactly right.
But Jesus is on foot.
Yep.
Now, when you step into this context, you can see that Jesus is trying to find some time for rest and privacy, but people are following him, are coming to him, and they're constantly plugging into him, as we said earlier. And I see here, Robert, I see that Jesus is getting very, very tired from helping people all of the time. Let's just look at some of these phrases that we find in our context. Look at chapter 7, verse 24. From there he arose and went away. He wanted to get away to the region of Tyre and Sidon. He entered a house, and it says he did not want anyone to know. Is that not intriguing?
Mm-hmm.
And of course, he's found out, and a Syrophoenician woman comes to him with a need. And of interest to me, if you studied Matthew's parallel account, you would find that she comes to Jesus wanting help. And initially, Jesus didn't answer her with a single word. It was like he was ignoring her, not to be cruel, but he was there for some R&R, and he didn't want anybody to know that he was there. That's just intriguing. Now come down to verse 33 of chapter 7. Taking him aside, now he's in the Decapolis area, and someone has brought to him a man that can't hear and can't speak well, and they want Jesus to help him. They begged him to lay his hand on the man to miraculously heal him. And so verse 33 says, taking him aside from the crowd. And then this word, privately. Isn't that interesting? Jesus wanted to take this man away so that just the two of them could address this man's difficulty. Again, the actions of a man that wanted some private time. Now step into chapter 8 and come down to verse 3. In chapter 8, verse 3, he's on perhaps the northeastern shore of the Sea of Galilee with 4,000 plus. And he says to his apostles, if I send them away, this massive crowd, if I send them away hungry to their homes, they'll faint. Now, right there in verse 3, in his mind, you're given insight into Jesus' thinking. He's wanting to send them away. He's wanting some time away from these people. Not that he didn't want to be with people, but he wanted some time to himself. And so you come down to verse 9 of chapter 8, and there were about 4,000 people, and he sent them away. The word sent away translates apoluo, and it's a combination of two words, luo, to loose, and prefaced by the preposition apo, away from, to loose away from, is the word picture. It's actually the Greek word for divorce. Jesus wanted to divorce himself of this crowd. He wanted privacy. Look at chapter 8, verse 13. Again, it's outside the perimeter of the actual context of what we're looking at today, but I think it further elaborates on this point. Mark chapter 8, um, verse 13. It says, and he left them, got into the boat again, and went to the other side. He's left a group of people that were causing him some challenges, the Pharisees. More on that next week. But he left them. And the word for left them in this passage, left, is aphiemi, and it's the word for forgive. And it carries the idea of being freed or being released. He released himself, he freed himself from being with these people. Then drop down to chapter 8, verse 23. In chapter 8, verse 23, he's in Bethsaida, and they bring him this man that can't see. And verse 23 says, he took the blind man by the hand and led him out of the village. He could have healed him right there, but he led the man out of the village. And then you come down to verse 26. He heals the man, and then it says he sent him to his home, saying, do not even enter the village. Jesus is in search for some alone time. He is tired from helping people. And you and I have felt that way sometime, haven't we?
Mm-hmm.
You know, I remember in my ministry, you would work hard all through the day trying to get prepared for a lesson. And I know it used to be, and I'm sure the same is with you today. Let's see, you have a Sunday morning sermon, a Sunday night sermon, a Sunday morning Bible class, a Wednesday night Bible class, and perhaps a midweek ladies Bible class or men's Bible class. There was a time in my ministry where I was preaching, we had 2 Sunday morning worship services. And sometimes I would preach at 8:15. I would teach a Bible class at 9:30, and I'd turn around and preach again at 10:30. And I'd be so tired I'd go to sleep at the dinner table. So you go through preparing for all of these lessons, but then you really feel compelled to, because of your compassion, you want to go visit the hospitals and see folks that are struggling with their health. And if you're in a metropolitan area, that could mean 2 or 3 different visits in 2 or 3 different hospitals. And you come home and you promise that you would make a telephone call, or you need to get back out because there's a particular couple that you want to visit with that may be struggling with their marriage, or they have an interest in Jesus. And you truly find yourself getting tired from helping people all the time. Has that ever happened to you?
Yes, sir. I can relate to that.
and, and then with your situation, again, I can relate. I had 3 little boys. You have a family that needs your attention. And I remember on one occasion, our boys were staggered so to where we only had 1 car, and we would go start one baseball game here as a family. And then I would leave, and I would go take another son to another baseball diamond where he could start getting ready for his game. And I'd come back and pick up the family as this game closed, and we'd go back up yonder, and we'd watch this game. We'd watch 2 baseball games a night, and we did that at least 2 to 4 times a week. And then we had T-ball on Saturday. And sometimes with some kind times in the year with All Stars, we were going to baseball games 6 days a week. And at times they would even play some baseball games on Sunday afternoon, which I didn't like. But you found yourself tied up with family and with the challenges of other people's needs
Mm.
and with your study time, constantly, constantly giving yourself to the lives of other people, which you did happily,
Mm-hmm.
but you did it at a cost.
Mm.
You became totally exhausted physically, emotionally, and if you weren't really careful, even spiritually. It could impact the way you started to think about people.
Mm-hmm.
So um, we find that in the life of Jesus here. I find the humanity of Jesus beginning to really come out in the last half of Mark more than even in the first. And this is one of those occasions, I think, Robert, where you can see his humanity. He's tired from helping people. Any thoughts there?
Mm. Well, I'm just, this is really easy to miss as you're reading through the text. I mean, you get so
Yeah.
caught up in the details because you're interested in Jesus's interactions with the Syrophoenician woman. You want to parse, why Jesus spits and sticks his fingers in the ears of the man that's deaf with the speech impediment. And you want to figure out too why, there's this other multitude that's being fed, and it seems a lot similar to the 5,000 thing, and then the disciples still seem a little thick-headed, that we'll talk a little bit more about in the next episode. And it's like, hey, you're seeing things in stereo, you're seeing things in repeat. Why aren't things connecting? And all of that, even too, speaks to, as we zoom out and take this as a section, the things that are contributing to the way that Jesus undoubtedly must be feeling. And I think the evidence that we've spent the last several minutes compounding shows we're not reading this into the text. I mean, it's
Right.
clear Jesus is feeling this, and I'm comforted by that. Number one, because it is clearly there, and so it's something that we ought to talk about. I think sometimes we shame ourselves into thinking that we shouldn't. And just to know that Jesus can, it's like I read this somewhere, Jesus knows what it's like to be human, and I'm
That's
comforted by
it.
that.
You bet. Well, I think it's also important to see that not only was he tired from helping people, but Jesus never ever got tired of helping people.
Hmm.
And there's a big difference, isn't there?
Yes.
He always had time to help those that needed help, even though he was exhausted.
Mm-hmm.
Now, let's look at those that he helped here, and we'll just kind of briefly summarize this to see those to whom he gave his attention. First of all, he gave his attention to the disenfranchised. A thought that I think we need to keep in mind today because, there are people that it's easy to ignore.
Hmm.
Not that we mean to ignore them. Maybe it would be better to say there are people it's easy to overlook. And on this occasion, you have in verses chapter 7, verses 24 to 30, the Syrophoenician woman. The Syrophoenician woman who verse 26 calls a Gentile. Number one, she was a woman. And women, like it or not, in Bible times were second class citizens.
Hmm.
We don't believe that,
Mm-mm.
but that's the way they were treated. A rabbi would thank the Lord that he was not created a Gentile or a woman.
Hmm.
So that's just the way women were thought of. And so here is first of all a woman coming to Jesus. And second verse 26 says that she was a Gentile, and not only a Gentile, but a Syrophoenician by birth. She was a disenfranchised human being to a Jewish male.
Mm-hmm.
But Jesus gave her some time. Syrophoenician is Greek in reference to someone that had a that had a well, was Greek in religion and had a Syrian tongue,
Mm.
a Phoenician in race with a Syrian tongue. And so this woman, in many different ways, was so different than a Jew. But Jesus, a Jewish male, gave attention to her, the disenfranchised too. Jesus gave attention to a demon possessed human being, and that a child. Remember, we even say today, children are to be what? Seen
Mm.
and not heard. I don't believe that. You don't either, Robert.
No.
But that's an adage that's been around a long time. Children can get on our ever loving nerves. And Jesus had time for children. And here, a demon possessed daughter. He exorcised the demon from the daughter, and that being from a distance.
Mm-hmm.
And I find that intriguing as well. Dropping down in the same chapter, verses 31 to 37, Jesus had time for the disabled. And this is where we read about that man who was deaf, he couldn't hear. And the English Standard Version actually says he had a speech impediment. We could adjunct to that, stepping into chapter 8, verses 22 through 26, the fact that a blind man, another disability, a blind man was led by his hand into the presence of Jesus. So, or led into the presence of Jesus. So you have Jesus giving attention to the disabled. Uh, I try to really give a lot of attention to individuals that are disabled. And it may be because of my background. I had an uncle that, due to a disease, lost his eyesight. He was a virile human being and he loved life. He was a cowboy down in Texas, loved horses, and eyesight took away his job, it took away his overall life and his ability to interact. And I remember him in the last years of his life sitting on the back porch of my grandmama and granddaddy's house where he would go and eat lunch every day. And that blindness is a horrible disability.
Mm.
And then, of course, I come from the Vietnam era, and a lot of guys came back from that conflict in a wheelchair. And uh, I try to all the time get down on my knees if I need to, and eye to eye look at individuals that are experiencing life from that vantage point. Disabilities are horrible. If we're not careful, we can try to skirt around because we're uncomfortable giving our attention to someone that's not like us. Jesus wasn't that way. Jesus had time for the disabled. And then chapter 8, those that were in danger of fainting because of hunger and a long trip that they had to face. The disenfranchised, demon possessed, disabled, those in danger. Jesus never got tired of helping people, even though he got tired from helping people. So he was exhausted on occasions, but he stayed engaged in his ministry. And I think that's why his life, one of the many reasons why his life is so compelling to us. He lived and went through what we do, but he did it successfully, Robert.
Mm-hmm.
So how did he handle this? How did he deal with the struggle of exhaustion from interacting with people, but still stay engaged? How did he avoid burnout where he just threw in the towel and quit? I think what we can learn, not about Jesus, but what we can learn from Jesus, gives us a solution to burnout caused from people wanting our attention so much.
Mm.
I'm going to pause for a moment because I'm sure you have some thoughts that you want to interject here?
Well, it is amazing just as you look at those encounters, and sometimes go back and read through, each of these three encounters that we're discussing in our context this time, because Jesus not only shows them time of day, but he continues to interact with these people with wisdom, with compassion, indicating that he really feels what they are feeling, even when whether it's one on one or whether it's 1 and 4,000 plus. Jesus indicates an intimate feeling with the compassion of those people, and so that's really cool. As we transition from learning about Jesus to from Jesus, I think it's important for us to realize just some general principles that I believe Jesus teaches and the New Testament teaches about accepting the need to care for yourself, for self-care.
Amen.
And again, this is for whatever reason, and I think particularly sometimes Christians struggle with this. We are called to think about others. We have a great commission to go into all the world, given by Jesus himself. Jesus teaches us to love our neighbors and to love God. And we're told not to think of ourselves more highly than we ought. In passages like Romans chapter 12, we're told that we ought not to merely look out for our own pursuits and desires, but to think about others. Philippians chapter 2, and that
Right.
is in keeping with the mind of Christ. Philippians 2, verse 5. And I think we focus so much on these kinds of passages, and they're paramount, they're important. But sometimes we do that thinking that Christians have to run themselves in the ground to try
Mhm.
and minister to these kinds of people. Sacrifice, no doubt about it. Going out of your way, second mile, turning the other, any of that kind of stuff, absolutely. We're not negating that. But cue in on something, and I'll take Mark's account of this in Mark chapter 12, verse 31, when Jesus is asked about the greatest commands. And he says, well, I'll tell you, the first one is this: love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. The second is like it: love your neighbor as yourself. Now, I said it the way we typically do, real quickly. Love your neighbor as yourself. There's something implied there, and it's actually explicitly stated. Love your neighbor like you love yourself. Treat your neighbor with the same amount of respect and care for which you would with which you would treat yourself. And there's implied there that I do care for myself, that
There
I
you go.
that I do love myself. Paul parallels this in Ephesians chapter 5 when he's talking about husbands toward their wives and how
Yes.
husbands ought to love and cherish their wives, because you're not going to mistreat your own body. And so we're to love her in that way. Again, exercising for her the care with which we would exercise for ourselves. So there's a need for us to care for ourselves that's given throughout these passages. And we see that's what Jesus is doing here. He gets away. He's trying to just take some time in private to maybe refresh a little bit. He is self-aware enough to know that the burdens are beginning to get to him. In the
Good
previous
point.
in the previous episode, we talked about how the Pharisees and the scribes are beginning to, scrutinize his disciples, and of course they go to Jesus with that about hand washing, and that kind of criticism and hypocrisy weighs on you as well. It can discourage you even though it's bogus. And so he just gets away and sort of turns everything off for a little while, or attempts to do so. And there's a lot of lessons from that I think a lot of modern Christians in particular maybe would do really well to really focus on and consider.
And this idea of self care, looking at Jesus and the self care he gave himself, look again, revisit these words and what they imply about our Lord's efforts on this occasion. Chapter 7:24, it says, he arose and went away. He wanted to get away. Again, chapter 7, verse 24, he's entire inside, and he did not want anyone to know. Once again, in chapter 7, verse 33, it says that he took this man away, and then this word is used: privately. Jesus on this occasion is self aware of his exhaustion, and he's trying his best to have some alone time where he can kind of recharge, though people are coming to him from every walk of life and seemingly from every corner geographically, still wanting his help.
Mm.
The popularity is causing the exhaustion. But what is Jesus trying to do to care for himself?
Mhm.
You see, he's trying to develop some time for privacy.
Mhm.
Privacy. And that's a solution to burnout, Robert. One of the causes of burnout is popularity of people. They're wanting to constantly, they're needing you constantly, wanting to be with you for one reason or another constantly, but trying to be to be self-aware and to guard ourselves, we must have some private time.
Mm.
Now, let's step away from our text and just get extremely practical as we try to do. I would like to make two practical suggestions that can create times of privacy away from everyone that is needing our help and demanding our time. Two suggestions for privacy. Remember these two words: family and hobby. To have some time for privacy, you need to set aside time in your week, if not in every day, for family. Family. Um, I'm going to get a little personal here. My daddy was a minister for 60 plus years and a very fine gospel preacher. He was in much demand in his life in the heyday of his ministry. He left us way too soon at the age of 74 due to cancer. But I'll tell you something. When my daddy was raising three sons, I was the oldest. I played football. And I did that for 6 years, all through junior high and high school. And I loved the game. And my daddy loved it too. My daddy never, not one single time, missed a football game that I played. I had other guys out there on the field I was playing with. And I know one in particular, his daddy never saw him play a game. My daddy never missed one. Now, football's in the fall. My birthday is in March. There were many years I did not have my daddy home for a birthday because he was out in the spring preaching in gospel meetings, and he arranged his gospel meetings to be in the spring so that he could be home in the fall and watch me play football, which was okay with me. My point is, my daddy had time for family in that he gave himself time for his children's sports.
Mm.
I never missed a football game that my sons played. I had three sons, and all three of them were extremely great athletes. And my youngest son was all state lineman. I never missed a game that they played. I learned that from my daddy. Um, I coached them when they were playing t-ball, and I remember practicing baseball in the backyard with my boys, and I remember playing football, and I was always the quarterback, and one of them would be the receiver, and the other would be the defensive back, and we would play game in our backyard of football, and just time that we had with children's sports. We developed family time. How about this? I'm sure I know the answer. Your children aren't at the point where they're playing ball yet, but
Mhm.
uh, you have a wonderful and a very sweet wife that I've known for a long time and taught her in college, and she's one of my favorite people, as I know she is yours for sure. Um, do you ever take your wife out on a date?
I do, as often as possible.
There you go. Do you
With
hire a babysitter?
Well, when possible. Sometimes we don't hire them.
Yes.
We just have people, from church that say, "Hey, I'll come over,"
You,
and that's even better.
yeah. Oh, yeah. That is better. But the point is, you have time with your children and your family, but you also create some time away from your children with just your spouse, and you enjoy each other, and you keep the romance and the sparkle in the eye always lit, because you're spending time with each other. You've got to arrange for that.
Mm.
uh, our lives, no matter what we do, we're going to be as busy as we allow ourselves. And if we don't uh, carve out some time for our children and carve out some time to date our wives, it's just not going to happen.
Mm.
Take family vacations. I'll speak to those of us that are preachers. I know preachers that don't take vacations. They use vacation time to hold gospel meetings. That's ludicrous. There's a senator from Louisiana. His name is Senator John Kennedy. And I heard him say something the other day about a group of people. He says they're stuck on stupid. I kind of like that. Now I'm just going to say to my fellow preachers, if you take vacation time away from your family to hold gospel meetings, you're stuck on stupid. You need to take time to be with your family and get away and think about nothing but the joy of being together and experiencing something unique with your family.
Mm.
I had a dear friend back in Nashville. We taught a Bible class together for almost 10 years. And he was a renowned educator in the Metro school system. And Carl Ross was his name. Carl said, vacations don't cost, they pay. They pay dividends.
Hmm.
And he was right. So, children's sports, date night with your spouse, taking time for family vacations, family is a great word to remember when it comes to privacy. Chime in here for us.
Well, I'm just thinking that if we're going to serve other people, and this will speak, I know you're about to use another word as well, but if we're going to serve other people, first of all, there's an extent to which I can't be a hypocrite and do more for others than I do for my own. And so, to your point of family, and I think maybe ministers need to think about this, but really we all do. It's so much easier to be your best Christian self to the world, and then when you get home, you let your guard down and you're your true self, which, as we know, is not the way it ought to be. But
Right.
sometimes our family gets the leftovers and everybody else gets the first servings.
Boy,
And
that's wrong.
right, it is. And we might be burned out or at the verge of it in brownout, and we'll give everything and lay it all out on the field, and then we'll go home and we'll just complain and sulk and do nothing but veg in front of the TV or go right to bed and leave the family members there to just have to deal with us and the
Yeah.
pity party that we're throwing for ourselves. And I think this is where we're beginning to see it's actually productive to build into our routine these moments when we're away and investing in and spending time with the people that we love the most, and how that will even serve more as we're ministering then to the outside world as well.
When I went on vacations, I would come back, and I know I'm sure with you it's the same. When you come back, it seems like you have a week's worth of work to do in 1 or 2 days. But I always felt energized.
Mm-hmm.
Man, I'm ready to get back into it,
Yeah.
dive into it. And because you were you were refreshed
Mm-hmm.
from the time that you had spent with your family and in these private moments with only family time. Here's another word to keep in mind for privacy, not only family, but it's the word hobby. I'll start this off and you finish it for me. All work and no play makes Jack
A dull boy.
a dull boy. Now, the idea of that proverb is without some time off, a person becomes bored and boring. And that dates all the way back. That statement, I did a little research, that dates all the way back to 1659.
Wow.
Ever since the 17th century, people have been saying all work and no play makes Jack a dull boy. But even right now in the 21st century, we find people, and it's all work and no play. We need to develop a hobby and have some time, some private time where we do something ourselves with ourselves and nobody else.
Hmm.
There was a preacher, and you probably know this name despite your youth. His name was Gus Nichols. He
Mm-hmm.
was a great, great gospel preacher down in the state of Alabama. In his lifetime, there was not a gospel preacher that was more influential. He was just a wonderful man. And on one occasion, he was preaching or speaking to a group of preachers, and he was asked, if you had life to live over again, what would you do differently? To which he said, I think I'd find me a hobby.
Hmm.
Wow. My mentor was a man named William Woodson. He was my major professor in grad studies. He was a fellow gospel preacher. He was my mentor, and he ultimately became one of my dearest preacher friends. Much older than me, but Brother Woodson loved. He had two loves outside of gospel preaching. He had a hobby. He loved woodwork. He did that as a hobby. But he also, especially in retirement years, loved to fly fish. And he would go fly fishing, and he was his hobby. It was his hobby. They had a swimming pool in their backyard, and he would practice the casting of his fly rod into his swimming pool. There was a nearby cemetery, and he would go out when he needed some space. He would go out and he would practice his fly casting in the cemetery, and boys would walk by and look. Well, what an idiot is that? He's fishing in a cemetery, but he was practicing his hobby. I have a dear friend in Nashville. He's a big old burly. He's got a big one time it was a handlebar mustache, big old burly. Owns a hardware store, several of them, and the guy has a hobby. He loves watercolor painting, and in fact, he is renowned as a watercolor painter.
Hmm.
And he sells prints, but he's developed a kind of a side business from even the hardware store business with his hobby. He just loves watercolor painting, and he's so good at it. The point is, you need some private time with just yourself. And that's what a hobby allows you to do. So, family and hobby feeds into that solution of burnout: privacy. Popularity among people with their constantly coming to you, wanting to be with you, needing you can cause burnout. We need, as we learn from Jesus on this occasion, some privacy.
Hmm. A little bit earlier, when you were introducing this, you used the term balance. And
Yes.
I think that's a good term. Uh, it's interesting that Jesus even keeps what he's doing to counter burnout or discouragement in a balance as well.
Yes.
He doesn't allow feeling tired to turn into a feeling of entitlement so that he pushes people away. He doesn't use it as an excuse for mistreating anybody so that he, is ugly or unkind to them in some way. He'll continue to minister to them, but he's doing that while also being proactive. And to the point of, we noted several times, Jesus doesn't let himself get all the way to burnout. He's he's caught himself early enough. He's self-aware. He's working toward this so that he's not hanging on by a thread at this moment. And I think so often, at least personally speaking, that's what I've done is I push and push and push and push, and I'm hanging on by a thread. And then when the next thing comes, it's like, well, that was the last straw. I can't take it anymore. And sometimes those feelings, entitlement or even an excuse for doing something that I shouldn't in terms of, mistreatment or something of somebody, as minor as whatever it might be, it's not excusable. And
Right.
I think there's a lot to learn from Jesus about this, but at the same time, we're not using this as a reason to separate or to excuse what we ought to be doing. Jesus didn't do that, but he still built this in, and it was very important.
Right. Well, I think we're going to see even next week when
Yeah.
we come back for this second portion of this um, this particular subject, that people can not only come to us in a positive way, needing our help, relying on us, trusting in us to the point that it causes us exhaustion, but there can be people that come to us in a negative light, and they're just a constant emotional drain with their hostility. And we're going to think about Jesus having to face that in this same contextual flow in our episode next week. And we'll even see something from his example that we can do to address the hostility and keep uh, people's bad attitudes from reflecting into our having a bad attitude.
Mm-hmm.
Our Lord, he was a human being, more than a human being. We know that he was the Son of God, but he was also a human being, and he experienced life as do we. And oh, the example that he leaves us and the ways that he helps us to navigate life in a successful, positive way.
Mm.
He's a
Well,
blessing, isn't
yes, sir. And that's what we're studying every week right here on Today with Jesus. We're so glad that you're with us for episode 2 of season 2 of this podcast. And if you've missed any of the previous ones, you got to check out the archives. They're all available in a very wonderful way at thelightnetwork.tv/TWJ. Now, you can listen directly on our website or with any of our distribution partners, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, Pocket Cast. You can even watch many of the episodes on YouTube if you're so inclined to do that as well. All of the previous episodes from 20 episodes last season or so, and then continuing on from there, are available from our website, thelightnetwork.tv/TWJ. In addition to that, you need to go and check out Brother Dan's website, danwinkler.org. It's been a little while since we've mentioned this on the podcast. Go and check it out to not only have links to this podcast, but also to book studies that are available, blog posts, and things like that as well. We do want you to go and to check that out. We have a brand new episode of Today with Jesus every Tuesday from thelightnetwork.tv. And we'd love to hear from you as well. If you've got questions, comments, concerns, anything that you would like addressed, please send us an email. You can send it to me, robert@thelightnetwork.tv. Things have gotten kind of real today, as we've talked about Today with Jesus. I learned what to do when I'm tired, but I can't be tired of it. Very practical stuff as we've gone through this. We've got a challenge coming up, I know, in just a minute, right?
it? We do. We do. Uh, in Psalm 69, verse 9, and in Psalm 119, verse 139, we have this idea of my zeal has consumed me. Robert, if we're not careful, it can.
Hmm.
Zeal can consume me in a negative light. It can cause burnout. So here is the very simple challenge. It's kind of, it has two sides, depending on where you are in life. If you find yourself blessed to have your family still home with you, and if your family is young, or if your family is older or teenagers, the first part of this challenge is this: take some time one night this week and play a game. Play a play a board game with your children. I know our boys love Candyland. Um, Play a board game. Go out and buy Mousetrap, put it together. Play a game with your little boys and little girls. If your children are older, uh, get a get dominoes or get a stack of cards and learn to play spades or hearts, pinochle, or Mexican train with dominoes. Spend some time with your family if your family is still home.
Hmm.
My family's gone. They've been gone a long time. My oldest son had a birthday and he's knocking on the door of 50. He's not there yet. So they've been gone a long time. We have grandchildren that come every now and then. And one of our favorite things to do with our grandchildren is to play Mexican train dominoes. And we'll do that at night several times in their visit. It's just a joy. Take some time to be with your family. Play a board game with your little boys and girls, or cards, dominoes, or such like with your older children. And then the flip side of that is, if you are where I am, if your children are gone now, and you're there, and you're blessed to be there with your wife in the empty nest, take some special time where you do something that's out of the ordinary, out of the routine. Go out on a date. I know that with the pandemic, we can't do a lot of that, but have a special night. Light a candle on the table. Have a picnic out on the back porch, but just do something different and special with your spouse. And this is taking time for family, private time to just get away from everything in life for the special ones in your life. It will help keep zeal from consuming me. And that's the challenge for the day.
Good stuff. Well, as always.
So what board game are you going to play tonight?
Hey, listen, I play a mean Candyland.
I bet you do. Don't you hate to land on that spot where you have to go all the way back to the first?
And I always draw the card. I don't know how it works that way, but I always seem to get it.
And that little daughter of yours, I bet she smiles from ear to ear.
Oh, you know she does. She wants to get the ice cream cone one. She just likes that one. She wants to draw the ice cream card. And for her, it doesn't matter if she's way ahead of it. If she draws it, she's won the game as far as she's concerned.
And I know your wife. She wants to win.
Oh, naturally. She's got to get to King Candy's castle fast, you know.
Oh, boy. Special times.
Yes, they are. But somehow we've degenerated to talk about Candyland on our podcast today.
It's important.
It is important. It is important. And our hope for you is that this has been an important episode in your life and in your development, as we've been thinking a little bit more about today with Jesus, learning how to be tired but not tired of it. Really important stuff. Join us next week for the second installment of this series. Until then, may you live with Jesus in your heart and in your ways.
God bless.